In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world rests in gentle slumber, let us journey back through the mists of time to a land where the Nile flows like liquid silver through endless sands. Here, beneath star-filled skies that have watched over humanity for millennia, the ancient Egyptians gazed upward and saw not merely points of light, but the very gods themselves walking across the heavens. In this sacred valley, where the rhythm of flood and harvest mark the passage of countless seasons, there emerged one of history's most enduring and beautiful mythological traditions. The story begins not with kings or battles, but with the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the fertile black earth of the Nile's banks and the endless red desert that stretched beyond. As you settle into comfort, allowing your breathing to slow and deepen, imagine the gentle lapping of the great river against papyrus reeds, the soft whisper of wind through palm fronds, and the distant call of ibises returning to their roosts. This is the world where Egyptian mythology was born, where every sunrise was a victory of light over darkness, and where death was not an ending, but a transformation. Long before the first pyramid pierced the desert sky, before the first pharaoh united Upper and Lower Egypt under a single crown, the people of the Nile possessed a profound understanding of the forces that governed their world. They watched the sun rise each morning from the eastern horizon, journey across the sky in its solar bark, and disappear into the western lands of the dead. They observed how the river's annual flood brought life to the parched earth, how the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and how the moon waxed and waned in endless cycles. From these observations, they wove stories of such beauty and power that they would endure for thousands of years, outlasting empires and surviving the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The creation of the world, according to Egyptian belief, began in the primordial waters of Nun, an endless ocean of chaos and potential that existed before time itself. In this vast emptiness, there was neither light nor darkness, neither up nor down, neither life nor death. It was a place of perfect stillness, where nothing had ever been and nothing would ever be, until the moment when consciousness first stirred within the depths. From these waters emerged Atum, the self-created one, who spoke himself into existence through the sheer force of will and word. As the night deepens around you, picture this moment of first creation, when the universe itself took its first breath. Atum, finding himself alone in the endless waters, began the work of creation. But how does one create when there is nothing to create from? The answer lay within himself, for Atum was both male and female, containing within his divine essence all the potential for life that would ever be. Through an act of divine masturbation, or in some versions by sneezing or spitting, Atum brought forth his first children, Shu, the god of air and atmosphere, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and rain. These twin deities emerged from their father's mouth, the first breath of life spoken into the void, the first exhalation that would begin the long process of filling the emptiness with meaning and form. Shu and Tefnut, the first couple, wandered into the darkness of the primordial waters, exploring the vast emptiness that surrounded them. They became lost in the endless expanse, separated from their father Atum, who searched for them in growing desperation. When at last he found them, his tears of joy fell into the waters of Nun and became the first human beings. Thus, humanity was born not from clay or breath, but from divine emotion, from the very real love of a father for his children. As you drift deeper into rest, consider this beautiful truth, that in Egyptian belief, we are all children of tears of joy, precious drops of divine love given form and life. The union of Shu and Tefnut produced the next generation of gods, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. But their love was so passionate and constant that they remained locked in eternal embrace, preventing any space for life to flourish between them. The earth and sky pressed together so tightly that nothing could grow, no creature could move, no light could penetrate the darkness. It fell to their father Shu to separate them, and with great effort, he lifted Nut high above Geb, creating the space between heaven and earth, where all life would eventually flourish. Picture this cosmic drama. Geb lying prone as the earth beneath our feet, Nut arched overhead as the star-filled sky, and Shu standing between them, his arms raised to hold them apart, his breath becoming the wind that stirs the leaves and carries the scent of flowers across the land. This separation was not cruel but necessary, for it allowed the world as we know it to exist. Geb became the fertile soil from which all plants grow, his laughter the earthquakes that reshape the land, his tears the springs that bubble up from deep places. Nut became the heavens, her body spangled with stars, her daily cycle of swallowing and rebirthing the sun, marking the passage of days and seasons. Each evening, the sun would enter her mouth and travel through her body during the night, to be reborn each dawn from between her thighs. This beautiful metaphor of cosmic renewal spoke to the Egyptian understanding that death and birth were not opposites, but parts of the same eternal cycle. But the story of creation was far from over. Geb and Nut, though separated, continued to love each other, and from their union came 4 children who would become some of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. These 4 siblings would enact a drama that would define Egyptian beliefs about death, resurrection, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. As you sink deeper into the comfort of rest, let the ancient rhythms of this story carry you forward, like a gentle current flowing toward the sea of dreams. Osiris, the eldest of the 4, was born to rule. He emerged from his mother's womb on the first of the 5 epagomenal days, those extra days added to the calendar to make the year complete. From his very birth, he was marked as different, as special, as one who would bring civilization and order to the world. Osiris was beautiful beyond description, with skin as green as the fertile Nile flood, symbolizing the eternal renewal of life. He was the god of vegetation, of the growing grain, of the Nile's life-giving waters. Where he walked, plants flourished, rivers ran clear, and the land bloomed with abundance. Isis, his sister and beloved wife, was born on the 2nd day. She was the greatest of the goddesses, the mother of magic, the lady of 10,000 names. Her love for Osiris was pure and complete, a devotion that would prove stronger than death itself. She was the protective mother, the loyal wife, the wise ruler who governed with compassion and justice. In her, the Egyptians saw the ideal of womanhood, the divine feminine that nurtures and protects, that heals and sustains, that never abandons those who call upon her name. Set, born on the 3rd day, was the god of chaos and disorder, of the desert and the storm. He was not evil in the way we might understand it today, but rather the necessary force of disruption that prevents the world from becoming stagnant. He was the god of foreign lands, of wild animals, of the unpredictable forces of nature that could bring both destruction and renewal. His relationship with his brother Osiris was complex, marked by both love and rivalry, respect and resentment. Nephthys, born on the 4th day, was the goddess of death and transition, the dark sister who served as guardian of the dead and protector of the canopic jars that held the organs of the mummified. She was married to Set but loved Osiris, caught between loyalty to her husband and attraction to her brother-in-law, a tension that would play out in the great drama to come. The 5th day brought forth Horus the Elder, sometimes called Horus, who would become the god of the sky and kingship, his eyes the sun and moon, his wings the winds that blow across the land. These 5 children of Geb and Nut would shape the destiny of Egypt, their stories becoming the foundation myths that explained everything from the flooding of the Nile to the divine right of kings. As you continue to relax, breathing slowly and deeply, let us follow these divine siblings into the early days of the world, when Osiris first took his place as ruler of the earth. The world at this time was still young and wild, inhabited by humans who lived like animals, knowing neither agriculture nor the arts of civilization. They wandered in small groups, gathering what they could find, fighting over resources, living in constant fear of the dangerous creatures that roamed the earth. There were no cities, no temples, no laws to govern behavior. It was a time of primal chaos, when might made right, and the strong preyed upon the weak. Into this world came Osiris, radiant with divine purpose, accompanied by his beloved Isis and a retinue of divine servants. He did not conquer through violence, but through wisdom, teaching the humans the arts that would lift them from their primitive state. He showed them how to cultivate grain, how to make bread and beer, how to work metals and weave cloth. He gave them laws based on justice and compassion, established the first temples, and created the rituals that would connect them to the divine realm. Under his beneficent rule, the world transformed from a place of chaos into one of order and beauty. Isis, meanwhile, taught the arts of medicine and magic, showing women how to heal the sick and protect their families. She revealed the secrets of childbirth, the properties of healing plants, the words of power that could ward off evil spirits. Together, Osiris and Isis created a golden age, a time when gods and humans lived in harmony, when the land was fertile and the people were happy. The Nile flowed at just the right level, neither too high nor too low, bringing perfect fertility to the fields. The sun shone with gentle warmth, the rains came when needed, and the seasons followed their proper order. But perfection, as the ancient Egyptians understood, cannot last forever. In the cosmic balance, every force must have its opposite. Every period of order must be followed by one of chaos. Set, watching his brother's success with growing resentment, began to plot against him. It was not mere jealousy that motivated Set, but a deeper cosmic necessity. He was the god of chaos, and chaos must periodically reassert itself to prevent the world from becoming rigid and lifeless. His role was to destroy so that new creation could begin, to break down the old so that the new could emerge. Set's jealousy grew like a poison in his heart. He saw how the people loved Osiris, how they prospered under his rule, how even the gods praised his wisdom and justice. Set felt overlooked, unappreciated, relegated to the role of the difficult brother, the one who brought storms and disasters, while Osiris brought only good things. He began to gather followers among those who thrived in chaos, bandits and warriors, creatures of the desert, gods of foreign lands who resented Egyptian dominance. Slowly, carefully, he began to plan his brother's downfall. The opportunity came during a great festival, when gods and humans gathered to celebrate Osiris's rule. Set appeared with a beautiful chest, carved from the finest wood and decorated with precious metals and gems. He announced that he would give this magnificent gift to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. Many tried, but the chest was too large for some, too small for others. Finally, Osiris himself stepped forward to try. The moment he laid down inside the chest, Set's conspirators sprang into action. They slammed the lid shut and nailed it closed, then sealed it with molten lead. Before anyone could react, they had hurled the chest into the Nile, where it was carried away by the current. As the night deepens around you, imagine the shock and horror of that moment. The perfect order that Osiris had created was shattered in an instant. The chest containing his body floated down the Nile, past the cities he had built, past the fields he had made fertile, past the temples where his people worshipped. It drifted out into the Mediterranean Sea, tossed by waves and currents, carrying the dead god toward an unknown fate. The world plunged into darkness and chaos. The Nile stopped flooding, crops failed, and the people wept for their lost king. But Isis, the devoted wife, refused to accept defeat. As soon as she learned of her husband's fate, she cut off her hair, tore her clothes, and began a desperate search for his body. She would not rest until she found him, would not stop until she had brought him back to life. Her quest took her across the length and breadth of Egypt, following rumors and signs, asking every person she met if they had seen the chest. The children who helped her in her search were blessed with the ability to smell the approach of death, and their descendants became the priests who prepared the dead for burial. Finally, Isis received word that the chest had washed ashore at Byblos, a city on the coast of Lebanon. A tamarisk tree had grown around it, enclosing the chest within its trunk. The king of Byblos, struck by the tree's beauty and sweet fragrance, had cut it down and made it into a pillar for his palace. Isis traveled to Byblos in disguise, serving as a nursemaid to the queen's children. Through her magical powers, she won the trust of the royal family and eventually revealed her true identity. The king and queen, awed by her presence, gave her the pillar willingly. Isis brought the chest back to Egypt, hiding it in the marshes of the Nile Delta while she prepared the rituals necessary to restore Osiris to life. But Set, learning of her success, was filled with rage. He found the chest, opened it, and tore Osiris's body into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length of Egypt. Each piece he threw into a different place, hoping to make resurrection impossible. The head went to Abydos, the heart to Athribis, the phallus to Memnonthis, and the other parts to various temples and sacred sites throughout the land. Once again, Isis began her mournful search, this time aided by her sister Nephthys, who had finally chosen to support her against Set. Together, the two sisters searched every corner of Egypt, gathering the scattered pieces of Osiris's body. They found 13 of the 14 parts, but the phallus had been eaten by a fish and could not be recovered. Undaunted, Isis used her magical powers to fashion a new phallus from gold and wax, and through her skill in the arts of magic and medicine, she reassembled her husband's body. The resurrection of Osiris was not like the resurrections told in other mythologies. He did not return to life as he had been before, but was transformed into something new and different. He became the lord of the underworld, the king of the dead, the judge who would weigh the hearts of the deceased against the feather of truth. His skin became the color of mummy wrappings. His body was wrapped like a mummy, and he held the crook and flail that symbolized his authority over the realm of the dead. As you drift deeper into rest, let the image of this transformation fill your mind. Not death defeated, but death transformed into something beautiful and meaningful, a passage from one form of existence to another. But before Osiris departed for the underworld, he and Isis conceived a child. Through her powerful magic, Isis was able to take the seed of her deceased husband and become pregnant with the child who would grow up to avenge his father's death. This child was Horus, born in the marshes of the Nile Delta, hidden from Set's wrath, protected by his mother's love and the loyalty of the gods who remained faithful to Osiris's memory. The childhood of Horus was marked by constant danger. Set, learning of the child's existence, tried repeatedly to kill him. He sent scorpions to sting the baby, serpents to bite him, crocodiles to devour him. But Isis's magic was too strong, her vigilance too complete. She healed every wound, countered every curse, turned away every threat. The child grew strong and wise, learning the arts of war and magic, preparing for the day when he would claim his father's throne. The other gods watched this drama unfold with growing concern. The cosmic order had been disrupted by Osiris's death, and the world was suffering as a result. Crops failed, the Nile's flooding became erratic, and chaos spread across the land. Something had to be done to restore balance, but the gods were divided. Some supported Horus's claim to the throne, while others argued that Set's victory in battle gave him the right to rule. The debate raged for 80 years, during which time the world remained in turmoil. Finally, the gods decided to hold a great trial to determine who should rule Egypt. The trial was presided over by the sun god Ra, who had grown weary of the dispute and wanted to see it resolved once and for all. Both Horus and Set were called to present their cases before the assembled deities. The courtroom was the Island of Flame, a sacred place where truth could not be hidden and lies could not be spoken. Horus argued that he was the rightful heir to his father's throne, that Set had murdered Osiris through treachery and deceit, and that justice demanded the restoration of the proper order. His case was supported by many of the gods, including Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, who served as the scribe of the court. Set countered that he had defeated Osiris in fair combat, that strength and cunning were the true measures of a king, and that the world needed a ruler who could handle its chaotic nature. The trial was complicated by the intervention of various deities who had their own agendas. Neith, the ancient goddess of war and weaving, was consulted as a neutral party. She declared that Horus should receive his father's throne, but that Set should be compensated with increased power over storms and foreign lands. Ra himself seemed to favor Set, perhaps because he was tired of the endless conflicts and believed that Set's harsh rule might bring a quicker end to the chaos. As you rest more deeply, letting the ancient story carry you towards sleep, imagine the great court where gods debated the fate of the world. Picture the Island of Flame, where truth blazed like the sun, where every word spoken was weighed against the cosmic scales of justice. The trial continued for years, with various contests and challenges proposed to determine the stronger claimant. In one contest, the two gods transformed themselves into hippopotamuses and fought underwater, with the understanding that whoever stayed submerged longest would win the throne. In another, they raced in boats made of stone, with Horus cleverly using a boat made of wood painted to look like stone, while Set's genuine stone boat sank immediately. The contests grew increasingly elaborate and dangerous. In one challenge, Set and Horus were required to spend a night together, during which Set attempted to rape Horus to establish his dominance. But Horus caught Set's seed in his hands and threw it into the river, then secretly placed his own seed on lettuce leaves that Set ate the next morning. When the gods called forth the seed to see whose was stronger, Set's seed answered from the river, while Horus's seed answered from within Set's body, establishing Horus's dominance. These stories, told around fires in the Egyptian night for thousands of years, carried deep meanings about the nature of power, justice, and the cosmic order. They were not merely entertainment, but sacred teachings that help the people understand their place in the universe. The conflict between Horus and Set represented eternal themes, the struggle between order and chaos, between civilization and wilderness, between the established authority and the revolutionary force that seeks to overthrow it. Eventually, after decades of trials and contests, the gods reached a decision. Horus would become the king of Egypt, ruling over the living world, while Set would be given dominion over the desert and foreign lands, ruling over the forces of chaos and storm. Osiris, meanwhile, would rule the underworld, judging the dead and ensuring that the cosmic order was maintained in the afterlife. This division of power satisfied the need for balance. Order and chaos life and death, civilization and wilderness, all had their proper places in the cosmic scheme. The coronation of Horus as king of Egypt established the divine right of the pharaohs, for each pharaoh was considered to be the living embodiment of Horus, the heir to the throne of the gods. When a pharaoh died, he became Osiris, joining the god of the dead in the underworld, while his successor took on the role of Horus. This divine cycle continued for thousands of years, providing stability and continuity to Egyptian civilization. But the story of the gods was far from over. As the worship of these deities spread throughout Egypt and beyond, their tales grew more complex and nuanced. Local variations developed, with different cities and regions emphasizing different aspects of the myths. The priests of various temples elaborated on the stories, adding new episodes and deepening the theological implications. The myths became woven into the fabric of daily life, influencing everything from agricultural practices to funeral rites. In Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, the god Ptah was worshipped as the creator of the world through his spoken word. According to Memphite theology, Ptah conceived the world in his heart and brought it into being through his tongue, speaking creation into existence. This sophisticated theological concept influenced later traditions and demonstrated the deep philosophical thinking that underlay Egyptian religion. Ptah was seen as the god of craftsmen and architects, the divine artisan who shaped the physical world with the same skill that a master builder shapes stone. In Heliopolis, the city of the sun, Ra was worshipped as the supreme deity, the creator and sustainer of all life. The priests of Heliopolis developed elaborate myths about Ra's daily journey across the sky in his solar bark, battling the forces of chaos and darkness. Each night, Ra would travel through the underworld, bringing light to the dead and ensuring that the sun would rise again the next morning. This daily cycle of death and rebirth became a central metaphor for the Egyptian understanding of existence. The myth of Ra's journey through the underworld was particularly rich in symbolic meaning. As the sun god descended into the realm of the dead, he would encounter various demons and monsters that sought to prevent his passage. The most dangerous of these was Apep, the great serpent of chaos, who tried to swallow the sun god and plunge the world into eternal darkness. Each night, Ra would battle Apep with the help of other gods, particularly Set, who despite his role as the god of chaos, served as the defender of the solar bark against the even greater chaos that Apep represented. This myth explained not only the daily cycle of the sun, but also the occasional eclipses that terrified ancient peoples. When the sun was eclipsed, it meant that Apep was temporarily winning the battle, swallowing the sun god and threatening to destroy the cosmic order. The Egyptian people would make noise and perform rituals to help Ra escape from the serpent's belly and restore light to the world. As you sink deeper into the peaceful darkness of sleep, imagine the ancient Egyptians watching the sky with wonder and anxiety, seeing in the movements of the heavenly bodies the eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness, life and death. The goddess Isis, meanwhile, continued to play a central role in Egyptian religion long after the death and resurrection of Osiris. She became the great mother goddess, the protector of children, the patron of magic and healing. Her worship spread throughout the Mediterranean world, and she was eventually adopted by the Greeks and Romans as one of their most important deities. Temples to Isis were built from Britain to the Nile, and her cult survived well into the Christian era, with many of her attributes being absorbed into the veneration of the Virgin Mary. The story of Isis and Osiris became the foundation for Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. The elaborate mummification process was based on the myth of Isis reassembling Osiris's body, and the rituals performed during mummification were designed to ensure that the deceased would be resurrected in the afterlife, just as Osiris had been. The canopic jars that held the organs of the mummified were protected by the 4 sons of Horus: Imseti, who protected the liver; Duamutef, who protected the stomach; Hapi, who protected the lungs; and Kebesenuef, who protected the intestines. The journey of the soul through the afterlife was conceived as a perilous voyage through the underworld, where the deceased would encounter various challenges and obstacles before reaching the Hall of Two Truths, where Osiris sat in judgment. There, the heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul would be admitted to the afterlife. If it was heavier, weighed down by sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by Amit, the crocodile-headed monster, and the soul would cease to exist. This concept of moral judgment after death was revolutionary for its time and influenced later religious traditions. The Egyptians developed an elaborate moral code based on the principle of Ma'at, which emphasized truth, justice, balance, and harmony. The deceased were expected to be able to recite the negative confession, a list of sins they had not committed, demonstrating their moral worthiness to enter the afterlife. This ethical framework provided a foundation for Egyptian society, encouraging people to live virtuous lives in preparation for the judgment that awaited them after death. As you drift deeper into rest, carried along by the gentle current of this ancient story, let us explore the rich tapestry of other deities that populated the Egyptian pantheon. There was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who served as the scribe of the gods and was credited with inventing hieroglyphic writing. Thoth was the patron of scribes and scholars, the god who recorded the deeds of the living and the dead, who maintained the library of the gods and preserved all knowledge for future generations. In the afterlife, Thoth was the one who recorded the results of the weighing of the heart, determining the fate of each soul that came before Osiris. Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of love and joy, was one of the most beloved deities in ancient Egypt. She was the patron of music and dance, the protector of women in childbirth, the goddess who brought fertility to the land and happiness to the people. Her temple at Dendera was famous throughout the ancient world for its beautiful architecture and elaborate festivals. The priests of Hathor were musicians and dancers, and the goddess was worshipped with singing, dancing, and the playing of sistrums, the sacred rattles that produced the music she loved. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and the dead, was responsible for guiding souls through the underworld and protecting them during their journey to the afterlife. He was the one who perfected the art of mummification, who taught the priests the rituals necessary to preserve the body for eternity. Anubis was present at every mummification, ensuring that the process was carried out correctly and that the deceased would be properly prepared for resurrection. His black skin symbolized the fertility of the Nile mud and the regenerative power of death. Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, was the protector of the home and family, the goddess who kept evil spirits at bay and brought good fortune to households. Cats were sacred to Bastet, and the ancient Egyptians kept them as pets and guardians, believing that their presence would protect the home from malevolent forces. The city of Bubastis was the center of Bastet's worship, and great festivals were held there in her honor, drawing pilgrims from all over Egypt to celebrate with music, dancing, and the ceremonial feeding of sacred cats. Sobek, the crocodile god, ruled over the Nile's waters and the marshlands where crocodiles lived. Despite the danger these creatures posed, the Egyptians recognized their importance to the ecosystem of the river and worshipped Sobek as a protector of the pharaoh and a symbol of royal power. The city of Crocodilopolis was built around a sacred pool where live crocodiles were kept and worshipped as living incarnations of the god. These sacred crocodiles were adorned with jewelry and fed the finest foods, treated with the reverence due to divine beings. Khnum, the ram-headed god, was believed to be the creator of human beings, fashioning each person on his potter's wheel from the clay of the Nile. He was the god of the Nile's source, residing at the first cataract where the river emerged from the mysterious lands to the south. Khnum controlled the annual flood that brought life to Egypt, and the people prayed to him to ensure that the inundation would come at the proper time and with the right intensity to nourish the fields without destroying the villages. Sekhmet, the lioness-headed goddess, was the fierce defender of the pharaoh and the punisher of the wicked. She was the goddess of war and healing, embodying the dual nature of the lion, both destroyer and protector. During times of plague or disaster, the people would seek to appease Sekhmet with offerings and rituals, believing that she had the power to both send and cure diseases. Her priests were often physicians, combining religious ritual with medical knowledge to heal the sick and wounded. Khonsu, the moon god, was depicted as a young man with the sidelock of youth, holding the crook and flail of divine authority. He was the son of Amun and Mut, part of the Theban triad that ruled over the great religious center of Thebes. Khonsu was associated with time and healing, and his phases mirrored the cycles of growth and renewal that governed all life. Travelers prayed to Khonsu for protection during their journeys, and the sick sought his blessing for recovery from illness. The goddess Neith was one of the most ancient deities in the Egyptian pantheon, worshipped from the earliest dynasties. She was the goddess of war and weaving, the creator who wove the world into existence on her divine loom. Neith was also associated with the afterlife, serving as the protector of the dead and the guardian of the canopic jars. Her symbol was the crossed arrows, representing her martial nature, and her temple at Sais was one of the most important religious centers in Lower Egypt. Mut, the vulture goddess, was the divine mother, the queen of the gods, and the protector of the pharaoh. She was often depicted wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing her role as the mother of the king and the kingdom. Mut was associated with the fierce protective instincts of the mother vulture, which was known to defend its young with incredible courage and determination. Her name meant mother, and she was invoked by women seeking protection during childbirth, and by all who needed the fierce love of a divine mother. Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, was depicted as a mummified figure holding a staff that combined the symbols of life, stability, and power. He was the god of craftsmen and architects, the divine artisan who shaped the world with his hands and his voice. The Great Pyramids were built under his protection, and the finest works of Egyptian art were created in his honor. Ptah was also associated with the sacred Apis bull, which was kept in his temple and worshipped as his living incarnation. As the centuries passed and Egypt's power grew, these deities became increasingly complex and sophisticated in their mythological development. The priests of the great temples elaborated on their stories, creating extensive theological treatises that explored the relationships between the gods and their roles in the cosmic order. The pyramid texts, inscribed on the walls of the pharaoh's burial chambers, contained some of the earliest written religious literature in human history, preserving the sacred words that would guide the king through the afterlife. During the Middle Kingdom period, the mythology of Egypt underwent significant development as the religion became more democratized. What had once been reserved for the pharaoh and the nobility became available to all Egyptians who could afford the proper burial rites. The coffin texts, written on the sides of sarcophagi, provided ordinary citizens with the spells and knowledge they needed to navigate the afterlife successfully. This democratization of the afterlife reflected changes in Egyptian society and the growing importance of the middle class in Egyptian culture. The New Kingdom period saw the rise of Amun-Ra, a syncretic deity that combined the hidden god Amun of Thebes with the sun god Ra of Heliopolis. This powerful deity became the supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon, worshipped throughout the empire and beyond. The temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak became the largest religious complex in the world, a vast, sprawling city of temples, halls, and sacred lakes that employed thousands of priests and supported tens of thousands of people. The mythology surrounding Amun-Ra incorporated elements from both the Theban and Heliopolitan traditions, creating a rich and complex theological system that reflected the political and cultural unity of the New Kingdom. During this period, Egyptian mythology also began to incorporate influences from the many foreign cultures that Egypt encountered through trade and conquest. The goddess Astarte, originally from the Levant, was adopted into the Egyptian pantheon as a goddess of war and fertility. The god Re-Shef, also from the Levant, became a god of war and plague. These foreign deities were not simply imported wholesale, but were adapted to fit Egyptian theological concepts and merged with existing Egyptian gods to create new forms of worship. The reign of Akhenaten in the 14th century BCE marked a dramatic, though temporary, departure from traditional Egyptian mythology. The pharaoh, originally named Amenhotep IV, rejected the traditional pantheon in favor of the worship of a single deity, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. This radical monotheistic experiment lasted only for the duration of Akhenaten's reign and was quickly reversed by his successors. But it demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability of Egyptian religious thought. The Aten was not merely the sun as a physical object, but the creative power of sunlight itself, the force that brought life to all living things. The mythology of the Amarna period, as Akhenaten's reign is known, was remarkably different from traditional Egyptian religion. Gone were the elaborate stories of gods and goddesses, replaced by hymns of praise to the Aten that emphasized the unity of creation under the beneficent rule of the solar disk. The famous Hymn to the Aten, possibly composed by Akhenaten himself, is one of the most beautiful pieces of religious poetry to survive from the ancient world, describing the Aten as the sole creator and sustainer of all life. After Akhenaten's death, the traditional gods were restored, but the experiment had left its mark on Egyptian religious thought. The concept of a single universal deity who created and sustained all life continued to influence Egyptian theology, even as the old gods regained their positions in the pantheon. The restoration was led by Tutankhamun, originally named Tutankhaten, who changed his name to reflect his return to the traditional worship of Amun. As you continue to rest, breathing deeply and slowly, let the story carry you forward through the centuries of Egyptian history. The late period brought new challenges and adaptations to Egyptian mythology as the country fell under the rule of foreign powers. First the Persians, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans. Each of these conquering cultures brought their own religious traditions, which gradually blended with Egyptian beliefs to create new forms of worship and new mythological stories. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he was careful to present himself not as a foreign invader, but as the legitimate pharaoh, the living Horus who had come to restore Egypt's glory. He made the pilgrimage to the oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, where he was proclaimed the son of the god, thus legitimizing his rule in Egyptian eyes. This clever political move demonstrated the continuing power of Egyptian mythology to confer legitimacy on rulers, even foreign ones. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by one of Alexander's generals, ruled Egypt for 3 centuries and became thoroughly Egyptianized in their religious practices. They built magnificent temples to the Egyptian gods, participated in traditional festivals, and presented themselves as the divine pharaohs in the ancient tradition. The famous Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic rulers, was as much Egyptian as she was Greek, fluent in the ancient language and deeply versed in the mythology that gave meaning to her reign. During the Ptolemaic period, Egyptian mythology underwent a remarkable transformation as it encountered Greek philosophical thought. The priests of Alexandria, the great center of learning established by Alexander, began to interpret the old myths in new ways, finding in them profound philosophical truths about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the divine. The story of Isis and Osiris was reinterpreted as an allegory of the soul's journey toward enlightenment, with Osiris representing the divine spark within each person that must die to the material world in order to be reborn in spiritual glory. This philosophical approach to mythology attracted scholars and seekers from throughout the Mediterranean world. The Temple of Serapis in Alexandria, dedicated to a new god that combined aspects of Osiris with the Greek god of healing Asclepios, became a center of learning where Egyptian priests, Greek philosophers, and scholars from many other cultures gathered to discuss the deepest questions of existence. The mythology of Egypt was no longer confined to the Nile Valley, but had become part of the intellectual heritage of the entire ancient world. The goddess Isis, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation during this period. No longer merely the mourning wife and protective mother of Egyptian tradition, she became the supreme goddess of the Hellenistic world, the one who possessed all knowledge and all power. Her mysteries were celebrated from Britain to the Black Sea, and her temples served as centers of learning and healing. The Isis of this period was a universal deity who transcended national and cultural boundaries, offering salvation and wisdom to all who sought her aid. The mythology surrounding Isis during the Hellenistic period was greatly expanded and enriched. She was said to have traveled to every land on earth, teaching the arts of civilization and healing to all peoples. She was the inventor of agriculture, the creator of law, the patron of navigation, and the guide of souls through the afterlife. Her sacred book, the hieroglyphic scrolls that contained all knowledge, was said to be hidden in her temples, accessible only to those who had undergone the proper initiation into her mysteries. These mystery religions, as they came to be known, represented a new development in ancient religion. Unlike the public festivals and ceremonies of traditional Egyptian worship, the mysteries were secret initiations that promised personal salvation and divine knowledge to those who participated. The initiate would undergo a symbolic death and rebirth, experiencing in their own person the same transformation that Osiris had undergone in the myth. This personal, experiential approach to religion was revolutionary for its time, and would later influence the development of Christianity and other religious movements. The cult of Isis spread throughout the Roman Empire, despite periodic attempts by the authorities to suppress it. Roman women, in particular, were drawn to the goddess who offered them a model of female power and independence unknown in traditional Roman religion. The Emperor Augustus tried to restrict the worship of Isis, fearing that foreign religions might undermine Roman values, but the goddess's appeal was too strong to be suppressed. Eventually, even members of the imperial family became devotees of Isis, and magnificent temples were built in her honor in Rome itself. As you drift deeper into peaceful rest, imagine the great temple of Isis at Philae, built on an island in the Nile near the first cataract. This was one of the last strongholds of the ancient religion, where the traditional rites continued to be performed long after the rest of Egypt had converted to Christianity. The temple was a masterpiece of late Egyptian architecture, its walls covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions that told the complete story of Isis and Osiris in exquisite detail. Pilgrims came from all over the ancient world to visit this sacred site, seeking the blessing of the goddess and the wisdom of her priests. The mythology preserved at Philae represented the culmination of thousands of years of religious development. The priests had collected and systematized all the various versions of the myths, creating a comprehensive narrative that encompassed every aspect of Egyptian belief. The walls of the temple served as a vast book, recording not just the stories of the gods, but also the rituals, prayers, and magical formulas that had been developed over the centuries. It was a repository of ancient wisdom, preserved in stone for future generations. But even as Egyptian mythology reached this pinnacle of development, forces were gathering that would eventually bring about its decline. Christianity, which had emerged from the religious ferment of the Roman world, began to spread throughout Egypt in the first centuries of the Common Era. The new religion offered many of the same benefits as the mystery cults: personal salvation, divine love, and the promise of eternal life, but with a simpler and more accessible message. The early Christians in Egypt were not entirely hostile to the old religion. Many of the symbols and concepts of Egyptian mythology were incorporated into Christian belief and practice. The image of Isis nursing the infant Horus provided a model for depictions of the Virgin Mary with the Christ child. The concept of divine judgment after death, central to Egyptian belief, was adopted by Christianity. The monastic movement, which began in the Egyptian desert, drew on ancient Egyptian traditions of religious retreat and contemplation. However, as Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine in the 4th century CE, active persecution of the old religions began. Temples were closed, statues were destroyed, and the practice of ancient rites was forbidden. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved at Philae in 394 CE, marking the end of a writing system that had preserved Egyptian mythology for over 3,000 years. The temple itself continued to function for another century, but in 535 CE, the Emperor Justinian ordered it closed and converted into a Christian church. The closing of Philae marked the end of ancient Egyptian religion as a living tradition, but it did not mean the end of Egyptian mythology's influence on human culture. The stories of the gods had been preserved not only in hieroglyphic inscriptions, but also in the works of Greek and Roman authors who had encountered them during their travels in Egypt. Writers like Plutarch, Apuleius, and Diodorus Siculus had recorded the myths in their own languages, ensuring that they would survive even after the ancient Egyptian language was forgotten. During the Renaissance, European scholars rediscovered these classical accounts of Egyptian mythology and were fascinated by what they found. The stories of Isis and Osiris, of Horus and Set, of the creation of the world from the primordial waters, seem to contain profound truths about the nature of existence and the human condition. Renaissance thinkers saw in Egyptian mythology a source of ancient wisdom that predated and perhaps surpassed Greek philosophy. The Hermetic tradition, which claimed to preserve the teachings of Thoth, known to the Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus, became extremely influential among Renaissance intellectuals. These texts, actually written in late antiquity but believed to be ancient Egyptian wisdom, presented Egyptian mythology in philosophical terms, describing the gods as cosmic principles and the myths as allegories of spiritual development. This Hermetic interpretation of Egyptian mythology influenced figures like Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Giordano Bruno, who saw in the ancient Egyptian religion a noble and sophisticated theology that had been unjustly suppressed by Christianity. The rediscovery of actual hieroglyphic texts had to wait until the 19th century and the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone by Jean-François Champollion. Suddenly, scholars could read the original Egyptian sources and discover how different the authentic mythology was from the Greek and Roman versions that had been preserved. The true complexity and sophistication of Egyptian religious thought began to emerge, revealing a tradition that was far richer and more nuanced than anyone had imagined. As you rest more deeply, let your mind wander through the great museums of the world where Egyptian artifacts are now preserved. In the British Museum, the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and countless other institutions, the physical remains of ancient Egyptian civilization continue to tell their stories. The papyrus scrolls with their beautiful hieroglyphic texts, the painted coffins with their images of gods and goddesses, the tomb walls with their scenes of the afterlife. All of these preserve fragments of the great mythological tradition that once gave meaning to millions of lives. The Book of the Dead, perhaps the most famous of all Egyptian religious texts, contains hundreds of spells and prayers designed to help the deceased navigate the perils of the afterlife. These texts, copied onto papyrus scrolls and buried with mummies, represent the democratization of the afterlife that occurred during the Middle Kingdom. What had once been the exclusive privilege of pharaohs became available to anyone who could afford the proper burial preparations. The spells in the Book of the Dead cover every conceivable situation that the soul might encounter in the afterlife, from crossing rivers of fire to avoiding the various demons and monsters that inhabited the underworld. One of the most beautiful passages in the Book of the Dead is the negative confession, in which the deceased declares their innocence before the 42 judges of the dead. "I have not committed sin," the soul declares. "I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men and women. I have not stolen grain. I have not purloined offerings. I have not stolen the property of the gods. I have not uttered lies. I have not carried away food. I have not uttered curses. I have not committed adultery. I have not made anyone weep. I have not eaten the heart. I have not attacked any man. I have not been a man of deceit. I have not stolen cultivated land. I have not been an eavesdropper. I have not slandered anyone. I have not been angry without just cause. I have not debauched the wife of any man. I have not polluted myself." This moral code, preserved in texts that are over 3,000 years old, demonstrates the sophisticated ethical system that underlay Egyptian mythology. The gods were not merely powerful beings to be appeased with offerings, but moral exemplars who demanded righteousness from their worshippers. The mythology provided not just explanations for natural phenomena, but guidance for how to live a good and meaningful life. The influence of Egyptian mythology on later religious and philosophical traditions cannot be overstated. The concept of divine judgment after death, the idea of moral purification through suffering, the notion of resurrection and eternal life. All of these central religious concepts can be traced back to the banks of the Nile. The story of Isis and Osiris provided a template for later dying and rising god myths, while the figure of Horus as the divine child born to save the world influenced the development of messianic traditions in many cultures. Even in the modern world, Egyptian mythology continues to capture the imagination and inspire new interpretations. Psychologists like Carl Jung saw in the Egyptian myths universal symbols and archetypes that reflect deep truths about the human psyche. The story of Osiris's death and resurrection was interpreted as a symbol of the ego's necessary dissolution before the true self could emerge. Isis was seen as the anima, the feminine aspect of the psyche that guides the soul toward wholeness and integration. Artists and writers have drawn inspiration from Egyptian mythology for centuries. The operas of Mozart and Verdi, the paintings of the pre-Raphaelites, the novels of countless authors, all have found in the ancient stories themes and images that speak to universal human experiences. The mystery and grandeur of ancient Egypt, as revealed through its mythology, continues to fascinate and inspire people around the world. Archaeological discoveries continue to add new chapters to our understanding of Egyptian mythology. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, revealed the incredible wealth of religious imagery and mythological references that surrounded the burial of even a relatively minor pharaoh. The walls of the tomb are covered with scenes from the afterlife, showing the young king's journey through the underworld and his eventual transformation into Osiris. The golden mask of Tutankhamun, perhaps the most famous artifact from ancient Egypt, depicts the pharaoh as the god Horus, his face serene and eternal, his eyes gazing into eternity. More recent discoveries have continued to deepen our understanding of Egyptian religious beliefs. The tomb of Seti I, discovered in the 19th century but only fully explored in recent decades, contains some of the most beautiful and complete religious texts ever found. The ceiling of the burial chamber is decorated with the complete text of the Book of the Heavens, showing the nightly journey of the sun god through the underworld. The walls contain excerpts from the pyramid texts, the oldest religious literature in the world, adapted for the burial of a new kingdom pharaoh. The discovery of the Gnostic texts at Nag Hammadi in 1945 revealed how Egyptian mythology continued to influence religious thought long after the ancient temples had been closed. These texts, written by early Christian mystics, show clear influences from Egyptian religious traditions. The Gospel of the Egyptians, the Discourse on the 8th and 9th, and other texts in the collection demonstrate how the ancient wisdom of Egypt was preserved and transmitted through underground religious movements, even during the period of Christian dominance. As the night deepens around you and you drift toward the realm of dreams, consider the enduring power of these ancient stories. For over 5,000 years, human beings have found meaning and comfort in the mythology of ancient Egypt. The stories of gods who die and are reborn, of love that conquers death, of justice that ultimately prevails over chaos, speak to something deep in the human soul that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. The great cycle of Egyptian mythology, from the emergence of Atum from the primordial waters to the establishment of divine order under Horus, mirrors the cycle of human life itself. We all begin in the darkness and chaos of unconsciousness, gradually emerging into the light of awareness and understanding. We all face challenges and setbacks, moments when the forces of chaos seem to triumph over order. But the mythology of Egypt teaches us that these defeats are not final, that death and dissolution are followed by resurrection and renewal, that love and justice ultimately prevail over hatred and oppression. The goddess Maat, with her ostrich feather of truth, reminds us that our actions have consequences, that the choices we make in life determine our fate in the afterlife. But she also teaches us that redemption is possible, that even those who have fallen into darkness can return to the light through sincere repentance and moral transformation. The weighing of the heart in the Hall of Two Truths is not just a judgment, but an opportunity for self-examination and spiritual growth. The story of Isis searching for the scattered pieces of Osiris speaks to everyone who has experienced loss and grief. Her determination to find every fragment of her beloved, to reassemble what had been destroyed, to restore life where there had been death, embodies the power of love to overcome even death itself. Her tears of joy when she finally found her children became the first human beings, reminding us that we are all born from divine love and compassion. The conflict between Horus and Set represents the eternal struggle within each human soul between the forces of order and chaos, between our higher and lower natures. But the resolution of their conflict teaches us that both forces have their place in the cosmic order, that chaos is not simply evil to be destroyed, but a necessary force of change and renewal that must be balanced with order and stability. As you surrender to sleep, let these ancient stories carry you into the realm of dreams, where myth and reality merge, where the gods still walk among mortals, and where the eternal truths that the ancient Egyptians discovered on the banks of the Nile continue to offer guidance and comfort to all who seek them. In your dreams, you may find yourself walking through the halls of the afterlife, your heart light as a feather, your soul purified by the wisdom of the ages. The legacy of Egyptian mythology extends far beyond the bounds of ancient history. In the symbols and rituals of Freemasonry, in the tarot cards that claim to preserve ancient Egyptian wisdom, in the New Age movements that seek to revive the worship of Isis and other Egyptian deities, the influence of these ancient stories continues to be felt. Whether taken literally as religious truth or metaphorically as psychological insight, the mythology of Egypt offers a rich source of meaning and inspiration that seems inexhaustible. Modern scholars continue to discover new aspects of Egyptian mythology as they apply contemporary methods of analysis to ancient texts. Computer modeling of the astronomical alignments of temples has revealed sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics embedded in religious architecture. Linguistic analysis of religious texts has uncovered layers of meaning that were invisible to earlier generations of scholars. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new texts and new information about how the mythology was practiced and understood by ordinary Egyptians. The democratization of knowledge through the internet has made Egyptian mythology more accessible than ever before. Anyone can now view high-resolution images of papyrus texts, explore virtual reconstructions of ancient temples, and read translations of hieroglyphic inscriptions. This accessibility has led to a renewed interest in Egyptian spirituality and mythology among people seeking alternatives to traditional Western religions. The environmental movement has found inspiration in Egyptian mythology's emphasis on the balance between order and chaos, civilization and nature. The ancient Egyptians' understanding of their dependence on the natural cycles of the Nile, their worship of animal-headed gods, and their belief in the interconnectedness of all life offer valuable insights for a world struggling with ecological crisis. The mythology reminds us that human beings are not separate from nature but part of a larger cosmic order that must be respected and preserved. Feminist scholars have found in the figure of Isis a powerful model of female divinity that predates and in many ways surpasses later patriarchal religious traditions. Isis was not merely a passive fertility goddess, but an active agent of change, a skilled magician, a wise ruler, and a devoted mother who would stop at nothing to protect her family. Her worship offered women a religious tradition that honored feminine power and wisdom in ways that were largely absent from later religions. The mythology of ancient Egypt also speaks to contemporary concerns about death and dying. In a culture that often denies or fears death, the Egyptian understanding of death as a transformation rather than an ending offers comfort and hope. The elaborate preparations for the afterlife, the belief in the continuation of consciousness after death, and the emphasis on moral behavior as preparation for divine judgment provide a framework for thinking about mortality that many find more satisfying than purely materialistic worldviews. As you continue to rest, breathing slowly and deeply, let the final saga of Egyptian mythology unfold in your consciousness. This is not a story with a clear ending. For mythology by its very nature is eternal, always being reborn in new forms and interpretations. The gods of Egypt did not die when their temples were closed. They retreated into the realm of symbol and archetype, where they continue to influence human consciousness in ways both subtle and profound. The sun still rises each morning, just as Ra emerges victorious from his nightly battle with chaos. The Nile still floods, though now controlled by modern dams rather than the tears of Isis. The stars still wheel overhead in their eternal dance, marking the passage of time and the changing of seasons. The fundamental patterns that the ancient Egyptians observed in nature and encoded in their mythology continue to operate in the world today. In hospitals around the world, modern doctors practice a form of healing that combines scientific knowledge with compassionate care, following in the footsteps of Isis, the great healer. In courtrooms, judges strive to weigh evidence fairly and render just verdicts, emulating Osiris in his role as judge of the dead. In schools and libraries, teachers and scholars preserve and transmit knowledge, serving the same function as Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The mythology of ancient Egypt teaches us that we are all participants in a cosmic drama that is far larger than our individual lives. We each play our part in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between light and darkness, between love and hatred. The choices we make, the actions we take, the words we speak, all contribute to the ongoing creation of the world. We are not passive observers of existence, but active participants in the divine unfolding of reality. The ancient Egyptians understood that mythology is not mere entertainment or primitive superstition, but a way of encoding the deepest truths about existence in forms that can be remembered, transmitted, and lived. The stories of the gods are also stories about ourselves, about our deepest fears and highest aspirations, about our capacity for both destruction and creation, about our eternal quest for meaning and purpose in an often chaotic and confusing world. As you drift toward the threshold of dreams, carry with you the wisdom of the ages, the understanding that life and death are part of a single great cycle, that love is stronger than death, that justice ultimately prevails over injustice, and that even in the darkest night, the promise of dawn is always present. The gods of Egypt, in all their beauty and power, in all their complexity and contradiction, offer us a vision of existence that is both magical and meaningful, both mysterious and comprehensible. In the silence of the night, in the depths of sleep, in the realm of dreams where all possibilities exist simultaneously, the mythology of ancient Egypt continues to live and breathe and inspire. The stories that began in the primordial waters of Nile, that told of the first sunrise and the first breath of life, that chronicled the loves and conflicts of divine beings, continue to unfold in the consciousness of all who encounter them. They remind us that we are more than merely biological organisms struggling for survival. We are spiritual beings engaged in a cosmic adventure of unimaginable scope and beauty. The final saga of Egyptian mythology is not an ending but a beginning, not a conclusion but an invitation to participate in the ongoing creation of meaning and beauty in the world. As you rest in peace and comfort, surrounded by the quiet of the night, you join the countless generations who have found in these ancient stories a source of wisdom, comfort, and inspiration. The gods of Egypt, in their eternal forms, continue to watch over all who seek their guidance, offering the promise that death is not an ending, but a transformation, that love is eternal, and that the light of truth will always shine in the darkness, guiding us home to the source from which we came and to which we shall return,